Well, we want to welcome everybody to today's session. We're really excited to be here today. As some of you may know, it is the 40th anniversary of CAST, who are the keepers, the original UDL, Universal Design for Learning aficionados, where we owe all of our great work around UDL to them. And I'm very excited to have this opportunity to introduce the series. This is a 9 and 9 series, and we are looking at each guideline, each Universal Design for Learning guideline individually, which is something we don't often do. We often talk about it broadly. We talk about the framework. So through this through the webinar, we're going to go ahead and dive in to each of the guidelines. So again, I want to welcome you. This is sponsored by the Goodwin Institute for Learning Innovation and the Goodwin University Center for Teaching Excellence and the University of Bridgeport Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching. For those of you that are unfamiliar with Goodwin University, we are located in East Hartford, Connecticut, USA, and we adopted Universal Design for Learning as our pedagogy in 2016. And since that time, we have been on a mission to train anybody and everybody who is interested in using long-term job-embedded professional learning institutes that we provide. And right now, today, we are actually in the process of training 3 universities outside of Goodwin University, and we're really excited about that. We've had 9 institutes run so far, and we're excited that we continue to grow expertise around the U.S. In regard to UDL in higher education. The seed of the Institute was born, I keep saying Institute because we're doing them, of the webinar, was born when we worked with several of our colleagues around the country and from Ireland to develop the New Directions in for Teaching and Learning volume on UDL, which was moved out, and Rob just put that in the chat, December 2022. It's issue 172. So many of the people who would be presenting over the 9 webinars are authors in that volume. If you've not seen it, there's some great information and insights into how to apply UDL in higher education. So right now what I'm going to do, and I'm going to read from my script, which I should have probably have done in the beginning, and go ahead and introduce you to our presenter, who is Allison Posey. The title of today's session is Beyond Compliance, Recruiting Student Interest in Meaningful Learning. And this webinar focuses on the recruiting interest guideline, as the title suggests. Our presenter, Allison, will use UDL to discuss using UDL to develop practices that recruit students' interest in robust learning opportunities in higher education classes. Allison is an international leader in the implementation of UDL. She works at CAST, and many of you are probably familiar with Allison, probably have seen her in other webinars and perhaps even in person, as we have at Goodwin a couple of times. Allison was a life science teacher in high school and community college settings, and she still teaches at LaSalle University, which is in Massachusetts, USA. She received a degree in mind, brain, and education from Harvard Graduate School of Education and is author of Engage the Brain, which is produced by the Association for Curriculum and Development, and her latest book, Unlearning, which is published by CAST. So Allison, I'm going to let you take it away. I'm going to stop screen sharing. I'm going to mute my mic. So welcome, Allison, and welcome to all our participants today. We're up to 106 people in the Zoom, so we're really excited about that.
Amazing. Let me get my screen share going here and get everything cleaned up. Can you see that all right? Oh, I want to be able to get my chat back up. Hello, everyone. Hi, I'm Allison Posey. It is fabulous to see some familiar faces and some new faces. I'm based in Boston, just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, where it's cold and cloudy. And I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time because I think I was a very compliant student for a lot of my life, and I'm really interested in thinking about how we can push our teaching and learning opportunities beyond compliance and really think deeply about recruiting student interest in meaningful learning. Those of you who know me were probably not surprised to see that I signed up as quickly as I could for this UDL guideline, although I like them all. I'm very excited to chat with you about this one. For introductions, I thought I would just share a little bit about me. So I'm a mom and nature lover. I will go to great distances to hike for a good sunset. I've worked at CAST for over 12 years now, which is amazing to me, a long time. And as Diana mentioned, teach at LaSalle. I got to teach at the University of Rochester last semester. I still have a soft spot in my heart for science. That was my background, and mind, brain, and education. And recently I baked some cookies, and they are brain cookies, and I let my students design their own brains, and it was super fun to, guess what? See variability. And none of the brains, no two brains were alike. And all what people thought were imperfections, I thought were absolutely what made the cookies delicious. So I thought if you would like to introduce yourself in the chat, make sure your chat's working. I always, as usual, try to have conversations. I do not want to just talk with you for the next hour. So I want to make sure you can get into the chat there and share some. Oh, there's no public chat. Okay. All right. Well, you can back message me at any point with questions, with your favorite kind of cookie, if you would like, how you might decorate your cookie, and we will go ahead and start thinking today a little bit about the critical role in recruiting learner interest. And we'll use the lens of UDL. Often in UDL, we don't want to embed the means and how we do things, but part of our goal is to think about UDL. So we are going to use the lens of UDL, recognizing, of course, there are lots of different ways that and frameworks we use to think about student interest. And hopefully you will gain some strategies. We are always looking for strategies. I often apologize that I don't have the magic wand that all of a sudden will make everyone just, poof, super excited and sing and dance. I often imagine a musical scene where all of a sudden students are dancing and, doing high kicks and, flips off the desks. We know that's not, I don't have a magic tool for that, but we're going to gain some strategies. And I put an image, I am a child of the 80s, and one of my favorite movies was Ferris Bueller. So often when I think about recruiting interest, some of you are nodding and some of you may not know what I'm talking about. So the image on the screen is of a student who's high school, but I mean, really could be any learner. She has her cheek, her cheek is on her hand, and she's rolling her eyes, and she's just absolutely bored out of her mind in the class that is straight lecture, and the professor is asking if anyone would like to contribute to the conversation. And no one wanted to. I was trying to simulate. So knowing that this is our focus for today, this is what we're going to be sharing about, this critical role of recruiting interest and strategies, I hope you'll just take a moment to craft some goals for yourself today. I thank you for showing up from all the different time zones and all the different places where you are. So please take a moment and just reflect on what you hope to gain from today. And you can always back message me in the chat, because I want to make sure you get what you need today. And if you don't get it during our lesson or during our time, then I'll make sure that we're able to follow up and try to figure out how we can connect to your goals, what you hope to gain from your time today, and hopefully all the series. I'll go ahead and put the link in the chat if anyone does want to look up at some point that anyone video. So what do you hope to gain from today? I also am going to invite you to just start activating your background and your own experience. So you might bring yourself on through this conversation today, or you might have a specific student or colleague or child you might be thinking about. But I do really want, again, you can doodle, you can take notes, you can, put things up if you want to share how you take notes or how you're thinking about this. But what does recruiting interest mean to you? What does it look like, sound like, and feel like to have people who are interested, learners who are interested? Of course, I'm, desperately wanting to look at your faces and try to, decide, are they interested or not? What does it look like, sound like, and feel like? So imagine your students. Imagine your physical space, whether it's online, face-to-face, hybrid, offices, cafeterias. Imagine your setting, right? Imagine your students and imagine them interested. What does that look like, sound like, and feel like? And then I'm going to ask you to go a step further than just in the classroom and start imagining the students coming to your class. Where are they coming from? How are they getting to you? Are they working? Do they have families? Are they eating? Are they sleeping? Do they feel a sense of belonging when they get onto the site, when they get onto the campus, in the cafeteria, in the student centers, in the event they maybe just came from, in the hallways they're walking to get to your classroom or to your site, your space? If you're on Canvas or a Blackboard, how are they getting to you? What is that context like? So you're not only imagining your space, but then how your learners are getting to your space. And I'm going to push you one step further to think about who's not in your space, who maybe couldn't get there because they couldn't get the transportation or couldn't get there, or who's not there because maybe they didn't think they had the background they needed or the language they needed or some of the skills that they needed. So they decided to not take your class or to show up in whatever the event is. Who might not even be able to afford it, right? Or the belief that the class actually isn't for them. So when we think of UDL, we really try to think of the spaces where learning happens and the goals and the methods and the materials and the spaces. But I also just want to push us. This is one of my favorite activities. So some of you who know me, maybe you've done this before, but learning is all the time, right? So I want to challenge you right now. Don't learn anything. You're not going to learn, right? And you can't do it, right? You are always learning. We are always interacting with our environments. So if you imagine right now that something happened to your right hand, which I picked this because I had something to happen to my right hand last year. I had to have surgery. All of a sudden, I couldn't use my right hand. And so I started doing more with my left hand, and my brain started changing and learning based on how I was interacting with the environment. So you can't not learn, right? Everything you do, even right now, is going to start to change your brain. Our brains are live wired based on how we're interacting with the environments. So we want to think about learning, and we want to think about opportunities for recruiting interest in learning literally everywhere you can imagine, right? So I'm trying to just, again, push your thinking a little bit as you activate your background, when you start to think about what recruiting interest means to you, what it looks like, what it sounds like and feels like in your space as learners get to your space, and for learners who aren't even potentially coming to your space. And please feel free to share ideas in the chat if you would like. Oh, thank you. Yes, and it's now posted open. So have at, as Tom Tobin says, have at it, y'all. Thank you. I love it. Yes, have at it. I do. I thrive off of it being more of a conversation. So that recruits my interest. I know what's in my own head. I want to know what's in your heads. So feel free to share any of the background that you're activating around what engagement, what recruiting interest means to you, looks like, sounds like, and feels like in all those spaces. the physical and digital distractions even. Yes, so you're starting to think about barriers to that engagement and interest. Thank you. Excellent. Eye contact, nodding. Right? It's part of why I crave looking at you all. Are they nodding? Are they smiling? So kind of like this, sharing stories before you share information, just trying to get them to activate that knowledge using real world situations. Great. These are great. Using digital distractions as part of the teaching strategies. Fabulous. Oh, refraining from sharing the outcomes until they sort of discover it, right? Whoa, and they go, wow, the dream, right? That aha moment we love as educators. I'll share a little, please do keep sharing a little bit of what recruiting interest I think meant for me before I started doing all this work in UDL. I think for me, it was often trying to think about hooks we use. So, I mean, I love telling stories. I often would try to bring stories, and I often tried to be the energy. I think I was often the Elmo in the room. Like I will entertain them. I'm going to have lots of energy. And some students love it, and some, oh my goodness, it maybe wasn't what they needed. And I remember a professor coming in the room one time, one of my physics classes, and he was riding a skateboard. This isn't actually him, but there's a picture that I found that was similar to him. And he came riding in on a skateboard with a fire extinguisher. And it was super engaging, but I honestly have zero idea of what we actually learned that day. It might have been action, reaction, one of Newton's laws, probably, but I remember the event, right? So I think I was often really good at those. Like, let's get them to be like, wow, that's so fun. That's so exciting. But then I think, kind of like I was in the physics class, then it was like, okay, now we go into the lecture and now we go into the learning, so there's like this great hook at the beginning, and then, okay, maybe don't even remember what you were talking about. And I do think that I thought of recruiting interest as something that I did at the start of class. After all, there's so much content and we have to get through all the content, but I wanted students to be engaged. So I thought of, engagement as like the hook at the very beginning. And of course, I always hoped that my course evaluations were going to be strong at the end of the year, right? So that's kind of how I think I thought about, recruiting interest from my own perspective. And then if we think about students, if we ask students, what does it mean to be interested in something, both in individual classes and across their learning at your site, I wonder what they would say, right? How is their interest recruited by the design? So I happen to have two college students living with me some of the time. Both my kids are in college now. So I asked one of them, and as a junior, that college student said, you know what, the most engaging part of my academic learning is a club that he's in. And he felt like it was really aligned with his career interest. And he said he learned more in that club than he did in any of his academic classes. So of course, as his mom paying for his education, I'm thinking, well, man, we could have just sent you to a club, I didn't realize. So anyway, it's just interesting to kind of think about, where and who and how is interest being recruited. Again, not just in your one specific context, but across the campus, across your site. So thank you for continuing to think about, how you're generating that student interest and how students themselves might ask about being recruited. Unfortunately, when I asked my daughter, who's a freshman in college, she said, I'm not, Mom. So, I'm not going to use her in one of my survey sample size because I don't think she wasn't quite in the headspace to give me an answer. But there's another aspect. So, you can turn to your own self-reflection. You can turn to asking learners themselves. And then, of course, you all know it's fun to look at the research and think about some of the research around recruiting interest. So one of the things that really shifted my thinking about recruiting interest, it rocked my world, I'm not going to lie, was this work by Lisa Feldman Barrett, who's based out of Northeastern here in Boston. And she has a phenomenal book called How Emotions Are Made, which I have linked in the resources at the end. But basically, the research that really kind of shocked my thinking was that we cannot read the emotions in others. So as much as I'm trying right now to look and get signs of interest from you all, I cannot in any way be able to assume that because Rob right now is leaning forward and nodding and now smiling, that that means that he's interested. And it's super interesting too, because I was thinking of myself as a student. I was really good at smiling and nodding at the teacher. And usually I was absolutely 100% not paying attention. It's almost like my smiling and nodding was just my learned response for this is what they want me to do. I'm smiling and taking notes, but oh, and I'm also passing notes. And now we know, and we're also on our devices trying to think that we can multitask. And the research shows the brain does not multitask. And so really interesting, right? To think that as much as, and someone mentioned this in the chat, we try to look for engagement in our students, we actually cannot assume that we know what engagement looks like or sounds like without asking. And there's a great example of, again, it's just a remarkable example of variability. So there was a study that found that anger, for example, like scowling, like if I'm angry, right? I mean, imagine like if you all want to make your own anger scowl kind of face, right? I'm angry, the drivers in Boston, the students not doing their homework, whatever that is, right? That only about 35% of the time in anger do people actually make the scowl face. And I, again, just thought that is so interesting that I might think I know when someone's angry because of the scowl, but only 35% of the time is that the case. And then some of the other reasons we scowl might make you chuckle. They made me chuckle a little. So you might scowl, for example, when you're concentrating or working hard, like, oh, I'm trying to get that. Or this was literally cited in the research, or when you have gas. So there you go. There are all kinds of reasons that you might make a scowling face, but the context matters. And our background experiences, what we've learned from our interactions with the people around us, has also impacted how we express and how we emote. And we know there's going to be tremendous variability in both. So again, just thinking about our facial movements during emotions are not universal. They're not. And a smile might mean disengagement, looking down, and might actually mean that you're deep in thought and fully engaged. So it's really important, again, not to assume engagement, but to really think about how we can use feedback and use a language around learning and a language around engagement to think more deeply about this recruiting interest in learning, because we know, and I'm going to go ahead and make the little brain fist model that I love to make. And you all can do this with me if you would like. So your hand can be like a brain, and your arm is like your spinal cord. The back of your brain is by your wrist. That's largely perceiving information, right? Vision, auditory, proprioception, like that all tends to come in. The back part of the spinal cord, the back part of the nervous system tends to be devoted to perception. The front part of the nervous system, kind of where your knuckles are, that's largely executive functions, planning. It's that prefrontal part of the brain that is the last part it continues to grow through our 20s. So largely the learners who we're working with, right? It's those executive functions, the goal setting, the planning that we're scaffolding. But the whole inside of the brain, and this is why I love to make this fist model, because I think it just exemplifies, it shows it so well. The whole inside of the brain is that affective, is that engagement piece. So to even get to perception, to even get to the executive functions, you have to be interested. If you don't recruit that interest, it's the learning that's compromised. It's so compelling, right? Educators have known this for all time's sake, right? You have to hook, you have to engage. And neuroscientists are like, oh my gosh, look at this. If you're not engaged, the other pieces don't matter. Literally, the way we perceive things depends on that affective state. If I'm in a math class and I don't feel like I belong there, or I am not interested, I'm not engaged, you literally don't perceive there to be the resources. So you might have teaching fellows available, you might have office hours there, you might have worked examples, and students literally may not perceive those to be resources to meet their demands, because that perception is so important, that affective piece is so important for our perception. And of course, thinking about perceiving and the variability of engagement is super interesting. I know there's a lot of talk now around artificial intelligence and AI and emotion systems that are working to detect physical signals such as these facial movements. And so we just, again, need to be super cautious about the interpretation of those, physiological meanings and what those signals mean and what they maybe don't mean. And be careful we're not, conflating movements with gas, for example, right? That we're really understanding, and also some of the biases that come from those programs, and the Western culture, and some of the pieces that went into coding those systems and what they're actually meaning. All right. So that's a lot. So we're thinking about just building our background around recruiting interest. I know, this can be a lot to think about, that in order to better understand our classrooms, to better understand across our campus, we need to talk to students, right? We need to build this dialogue. And what an important place to start, but to start thinking about communicating around interest and engagement, and inviting students into the conversation from the very beginning, even how they introduce themselves. I mean, it doesn't have to be introducing themselves through cookies, right? But what are the questions that you're asking students? How are you getting to know them and their interests? How are you starting to understand the different ways that they're making sense of our materials and that they're participating in our class? How are they co-constructing norms with us to really make sure that we're understanding the different ways that they come to our classrooms? So I do kind of want to pause here because that's a big introduction, and just see if there are any questions, any thoughts you have, because I think a number of strategies have already been dropped, and I do want to encourage you all to keep sharing more ideas. Thank you, Sarah, for noting the AI systems can also be very normative. Yep. Thinking about working one-on-one with students to help establish that independent learning goals. Thank you for that strategy. Amazing. Finding relevance in what they're doing. This is so good. Cultivating curiosity. Beautiful. You have a works almost every time strategy. Good. I'm not going to say it right off the bat, Tom. So I also want to note that we've been talking for 15 minutes here about recruiting interest and thinking about student interest, and I haven't mentioned the UDL guidelines yet. What? So drum roll, here are the tool that we are going to focus on today and use is Universal Design for Learning. So whether this is your first time here, welcome to UDL, or whether you have been using them for decades, I know every time I use these guidelines, or every time I hear someone else share about how they're interacting with them or using them, I learn something. So no matter where you are in your UDL journey, welcome. We're so happy to have you. And here's the link to those guidelines again. And I know you'll be using them a lot in this series. So this being the first kickoff, I did want to make sure you had the link, udlguidelines.cast.org. And I do want to give you a, kind of pause and make sure you have a chance to pull them up if you would like to, or maybe you have your favorite paper copy that you've been using for years and years. But the guidelines, there's Diana's right there and handy. Amazing. Mine I carry around on my fist, right? And here's my UDL guidelines. Oh, and Carrie's like, wait, I have mine too. So we are focusing, so there are those three broad principles, as I kind of shared, that align broadly to the organization of the nervous system. And we're going to zoom in and just think about options for recruiting interest. And the language, we at CAST are in the process, as many of you know, as revising this guidelines version 2.2, which is the version that I'm sharing here with you now. And there's been a large multi-year from the field collaborative effort to really update these guidelines. And let me tell you, I just got out of a staff meeting where we arm wrestle over these words, each and every word. So, and they will be released as part of the 40th this year. So know that is finally coming this year. I know people are excited. I'm super excited. But I want to really dive into some of the words that are used currently in this version, because I like some of them I like, some of them I don't, but they're interesting to really think about. They're also interesting to think about translating if English isn't your first language, to think about what, some of these words mean across languages. Because one of the things, again, in my work with UDL and with you all, and thinking about like the huge value add that I think UDL gives us is a common language for learning. So we talked about, at the beginning, we activated our background. We were thinking about ourselves, our experiences, our learn, and we didn't have this language around UDL. So this was very intentional to, kind of share what I hope is, for me, the biggest value add about UDL is this common language. It's going to allow us to understand more deeply and press in, lean in together more, and be more intentional in our design because we have these shared words, this shared language where we're talking about what we think these words mean, and discuss them. And this I had never been able to do for learning before UDL. So one of the words I want to focus in on is this word optimize. It occurs twice just in this one UDL guideline of recruiting interest. And it's optimizing choice and optimizing relevance, value, and authenticity. And I love this word optimize because it's not just about giving choice. A huge misconception about UDL is, oh, don't worry, I do that UDL. I give my students choice. And whenever I hear that, I'm like, well, that's not really UDL. That's giving choice. The thing that's so important is sometimes a first step into UDL is just starting to open up choices. So I want to respect that and I value that. But no, there is more. This word optimize is so important. So I think for me to truly be able to optimize, you have to know the desired outcome, right? Is it a skill? Is it content? Is it understanding? What is it you want your learners to gain? And this is where I love the GPS analogy. If I want to optimize how I'm going to get to visit Diana in Connecticut, if I want to I have to know where I'm going, right? Yes, you have to know the goal. You have to know what you're trying to get to. So with a goal clear, and you might call them objectives, you might want to call that, standards, whatever those goals are, those objectives, those desirable difficulties, that desired outcome. With that clear, all of a sudden we're able to start to optimize how there can be choice and options. And we can reduce some of those distractions. We can be like, actually, that option is going to be a distractor. Let's get rid of that one. Let's think about some other ones that are going to help us get to those, again, those goals that are so important. So that word optimize, I think, really encourages us to look at our goals, and that allows us to optimize the choice. And so importantly, we want students, especially in higher education, to be able to own that learning more and more. I think kindergartners need it all the way through higher ed, but to be able to have that autonomy to make the choice. This is what's best for me. Having an audio version of the text, oh my gosh, please use that. I don't care what the label, what the reason, what the need. If that is what you need and we know the goal, that's going to help optimize your choice and give you that autonomy to be able to make the choice that's best for you. So I really do like that word optimize. And I also think it's important when we optimize and we're thinking deeply about our goals, that we start to think about, even. So here's an example that happened not too long ago. I was at a university locally here, and the debate was how, we want students to come to class. And so we're not going to provide a videotape of our lecture because we want students to come to class. Well, right there, I'm going to pause for a moment to see what you all think about it. Right there are two goals, right? There are two goals. One goal is students to come to class, and another goal is for students to build their background. So there are two goals in that statement. They are not the same statement. They're two goals. And once you understand that, once you start to parse them apart, all of a sudden you know how to optimize the choice. And the conversation became almost comical because the answer, like what the design strategy should be, became so clear to the professor. So if, for example, through the lecture, if the goal is for students to build their background, of course you want to provide the video because it's another means for students to be able to build their background. They could pause, rewind, get the transcript, translate it, watch it with a buddy and pause and have questions, right? Or so you could have annotated articles and notes to go with it. You give students the autonomy to choose what's best for them on that day to build their background. The rigor is high because you're wanting them to build their background. Here's the content that you're wanting to get, that you're wanting them to learn, and they can optimize their choice and their autonomy to gain ownership over that learning, right? But if you want to recruit students' interest so they want to come to class, and we're getting beyond compliance, like, oh, if I don't show up, I get docked, and I can only miss 2 classes or they're going to take off points. If you want to recruit students to want to come to class, then what are the experiences you can give them in class to generate this? And I was talking with a psychology instructor and he was like, oh my gosh, I have this great example. He has students act out action potentials with this ball thing that he does with passing the balls, and he's able to simulate myelin. And students have come to know this little simulation he does, and they want to come to class for that reason. So he's like, all of a sudden, my attendance is huge on those days because students have heard about this action potential activity and it generates interest. It builds community. It builds a common shared experience that goes beyond listening to the professor. So I like to think that I give great stories that will make students want to come to class. But that's so different, right? That's so different than actually generating those experiences, generating that interest, building community. So, Tom, to answer your question, what's my one favorite thing to generate interest? And I think it's where you can find those common shared experiences, those moments that we share together. And often they involve laughter. One of the things I realized I missed most during COVID, and from even right now, if we were together in a shared space, is shared laughter. There's something so good for the nervous system about that, right? The release of all those endorphins that can happen from that shared experience. And it goes beyond, I think, even language, right? Something like laughter, something about an experience. Really thinking about, how those shared experiences can deepen the learning, deepen the representations of that robust experience. So I'll kind of pause there and just see if there are any questions, any ways of kind of thinking about that critical role of the goal in order to provide choice and autonomy. And that really gets at the first checkpoint within recruiting interest. Applying learning. Great. So now if we kind of move to the next checkpoint, these are not done in any particular order, but we think about ways that we want to optimize the relevance, value, and authenticity. This for me is largely when students say, why do we need to know this? We need to know, right? I mean, this often can be so important for us as the gateway into the real world college or real world work experience. How do historians and mathematicians, clinicians, scientists, therapists, how do they think about these problems? How do they learn new information? How do they interact with and participate in the real world? As a science instructor, through COVID-19, I was thinking about how are scientists learning the information they need to learn about this virus? How are they sharing what they're learning? How are they sharing it with each other, right? And then how am I bringing that to life in my class so that my students are gaining that same real world experience? And sometimes I remember this from my organic chemistry class. I don't remember the name of my professor, but I would love to say, I hope that he shifted the way he does the instruction. We got through the semester and then ran out of time at the end for the application of a lot of the organic chemistry. And I just remember as a biologist being like, I want to know that. And I never did take organic chemistry again to find out some of those connections. So don't save that good stuff, the application, just for your higher level classes. Don't save those just for the end of the semester. Start with those. That's the good stuff. That's what we want to know. We want to be able to apply it. What are the real world problem sets? There was a math teacher the other day who was so dogged, and she was like, they need to be able to do the problems first and then they can apply them. But if they don't know how or where to apply them, they don't even care. They don't know why. So it was a really good circle story. And we had, again, good shared laughter around the richness of the discussion, because of this language that UDL was giving us for thinking about the design, the intentional design of our instruction. Yes, let's spoil the ending. I love that. That's so funny. So really thinking about, how are you starting from the beginning with the good stuff? And I do recognize some of us have very large classes. And I heard one of the professors say, she has over 400 students this semester. Sometimes you need multiple choice tests for just the reality of grading, but how can you still take those multiple choice questions and give them context, give them meaning, give them some sort of real world application, so it's not just regurgitating facts and these decontextualized little bits of information. I'm in a trivia group and we go and try to play trivia on Tuesdays. And I'm so bad at it because it's like there's just this random fact out of nowhere. I want the context. I want the story. I want to think about the application. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I know the answer. I know how to apply it. So really think deeply about that relevance, that value, the authenticity. Don't just save it for the students at the end or in the higher level classes. Let's give that to them from the beginning. And I know Sam Johnston and I did a great article, and we learned from this educator. I just want to give a call out to Elizabeth Morch. She's from a community college in Western Canada. And they worked really hard to think about creative strategies to really try to change some of the assessment practices, because she recognized that they weren't identifying and validating the students who had the knowledge, but they just couldn't show it in the particular way that the assessment was being delivered. So again, I'm kind of thinking of how important our goals are, how important that the assessments, the formative and the summative ones, are relevant, they're authentic, they're important to our communities and to what we're learning. Okay, so I know it's a lot. And we can also think about the little things. Oh my gosh, this was a game changer too. Recently, I was working on a project and we went back and we looked at our slides and we had a number of quotes and we thought, oh, it'd be nice if we put pictures of the people who were saying the quotes with the quotes. And every single quote we used were by European white males. Their voice needs to be at the table, 100%. I'm not saying they don't, but all of a sudden I realized I didn't have other voices in my quotes in this conversation that I was having with my students. So having a different representation of the information revealed a blindness on a blind spot for me in the work that I was doing. So really thinking about how are we inviting the multiple voices, the multiple perspectives in all aspects of our curriculum and the images we're using and the examples that we're giving. Let's ask the students too, do you feel represented in this? They will help us know where they are and where they aren't. And when you start to have those norms, that trust, that community, it is amazing how it becomes a conversation about designing for learning instead of feelings of exclusion or lack of engagement. So I'll again kind of pause and see if there are thoughts, ideas, ways that you go through and analyze your curriculum to make sure you have different voices, the windows and mirrors into different experiences. It's not just by changing the names and the examples. And one of my favorite UDL checkpoints, it's such a big one. And so I don't even know how to do it justice in this, but is minimizing threats and distractions. So I had never thought about this before UDL. I had never thought about the potential threats and distractions in my environment and how that was impacting the learning. Ironic for someone who's studied brain science, right? Because I know at every moment our nervous system is evaluating how we're doing and we adjust our physiology accordingly. Should a tiger come in the room right now, again, my physiology will adjust accordingly. If I asked all of you right now, I used this example one time, Diana, at your inaugural UDL conference, but if I asked you all right now to hop around on pogo sticks, some of you would be like, wow, I've really needed to move and I'm so excited. And some of you might be terrified and angry and all kinds of physiology, right? So really thinking about every situation your nervous system is evaluating, is this good or bad for me? And how much energy do I have to put forth in that? So often we're worried students are going to pick the easy way. I hope they do. That's how I want to be. I want to be efficient. I want to get my job done. I want to look for the most efficient way to do it because I want to know the goal and I want to be able to get there. So I don't always think it's a bad thing for students to be strategic in how they want to get to the answers. There are, the skills, the desirable difficulties that we're working toward. So what we want to think about again too, I get myself all distracted because I get all excited about this, is when we present our learning environments, our experiences, again, anywhere you are on your site campus, thinking about the perception and the physiological fight or flight response that can change, heart rate, blood pressure, the glucose to the muscles to get the body ready for action, the cortisol that's released. And systemically, when there are inequities that persist, there is physiological activation that can remain for years. So students, by the time they come to higher ed institutions, may be in this state for years. And racial microaggressions or subtle forms of discrimination that can include uses of words, tone of voice, expressions, subtle actions can negatively impact literally someone's health and their mental health. Like these subtle things, these summative messages that can be conveyed across so many aspects of our educational institutions, the media that we're just bombarded with all the time on these devices and the screens, they impact students' perceptions of their value and their skills and the perceptions literally of those resources that are available for them. And I know it's so much to think about. This particular checkpoint, thinking about how we minimize those threats and distractions through our design, can be a whole focus for years of your work. Continues to remain front and central, I think, for me in terms of these UDL guidelines and how I can work with students to try to reduce those, whether it's little things like being able to put headphones on when you're working or having a low light area of the space or some flexibility to sit or stand or hop on a pogo stick if you want to hop on a pogo stick. But also thinking about your syllabus, your materials, the content that's coming towards students. How does it feel? How are there ways to change reduce distractions, to increase them if they're helpful? I know they can be, distractions can be helpful for students. How are we holding high expectations for all of our learners and really trying to reduce some of the stereotypes of who should and should not be in our classroom? So I challenge you to think about who's not in your classroom right now and how can we get them there if they have an interest, or even if they don't think they have an interest yet, how can we get more participation in your course, in your class? Because that diversity in thinking and in experiences, it's our superpower, right? This is how we learn. This is how we grow as humans. So what is it that's blocking some students from being in your class? And how can we make it so they're able to be there? Whether it's, the cost of the class, the logistics to get to the class, the way they feel about a course or a discipline. How can we get them into our institutions, into our classrooms, and really build opportunities for those safe learning relationships? So for me, just kind of taking a step back, we were able to think about recruiting interest in a lot of ways before UDL. And then with UDL, I can't stop thinking about all the different ways that we can try to recruit interest, because it's so much more than being fun. And I love a good story. I love a good story, but it's so much more than a good story, right? But it's really thinking about that optimization of choice and autonomy, the relevance and value and authenticity, not just from my perspective. When we ask, for whom is that of value? For whom is that authentic? Are we bringing multiple voices and perspectives to the table? And this minimizing threats and distractions, that emotional piece, again, I'll open up my hand, I'll open up my nervous system, recognizing that that can be the gatekeeper for that higher level cognitive learning is just so, so impactful. So keep thinking about your syllabus, your materials, your methods, your assessments. And so often they're not designed to meet the variability of learners that we know we'll have. And a number of years ago, I had one of those transformative moments where it was right before a session that I was doing, and I didn't give myself enough time to do the alt text on my images, and someone needed them. And they weren't able to access my slides from the beginning, just from that alt text. So it might seem like the littlest thing, put alt text on your images. But for someone to even be interested in my session and they can't access what was visually available, they were out. They were done from the very beginning. So those little things. So Tom, I don't even know if I have a good answer now for what my favorite strategy is, because alt text is one of my favorite now. But those little things are so critical. And remember, we design for goals, not the activity, right? And we don't want to mistake fun for engagement. And variability can start to feel overwhelming. So it's so much easier to sort or label or blame the student for not being engaged, but we're going to stop all that. We're going to really think about how we can design to reduce the barriers. And one of the most powerful ways is just in the language we're using. UDL gives us a language to share with each other, to think about how we're reducing barriers to engagement so that all of our learners, each and every one in our classroom and who are on the campus and who aren't in our classrooms, are able to get to this really exciting. We teach the greatest stuff, right? It's so fun. It's such a gift to be able to work in higher education, to be able to get around this rich content. And so instead of using language that frames barriers in the learners, like my students aren't engaged, back to that student at the very beginning, like her hand on her cheek, just bored, really thinking about the goals so you can optimize those options and reduce the barriers and really get to that robust learning. And I know those of you who know me have heard, probably seen these exact images. So the goals, reducing the barriers, and then through the design, let's give access to that interest so students just show up in the first place. So I'll pause here and see if there are other ideas, strategies that are resonating, something you might take from this and start to do or start to try or start to just think about. Oh, thank you, Katie, for even noting that emojis can be a way to start sharing the language. Yes. And to clarify the symbols for everyone, yes, I used to think the thumbs up was sarcastic and rude, like, yeah, sure. But it turns out it's not. It's friendly, but it's good to understand, right? We need to make sure we're sharing that language. Oh, that's a good concrete one, Tom. Just the difference between offering choice versus optimizing choice. Love it. Love it. I hope you find that language still in the next version of the guidelines. I won't let go of optimizing easily. Fun can be great too. I'm so glad that you shared this. Susan Marie, I'm so glad that you shared. Fun is important too, right? We want that shared laughter. But when we're optimizing choice, it's not just about the fun. It's also going after those deeper, meaningful, authentic, where do we use this? Why is this of value? Amazing, amazing. We anticipate those guidelines to come out this summer to fall. So I don't want to get too over-promising. We'll release a draft this spring, and it will be for feedback from the field, because again, this is a community-driven process. So we will want your feedback. So look for, and I'll put the link. I don't think I did include the link to that. Oh, good. You're getting, hi, Brian and Matthew. Great to see you. Appreciate debunking common techniques like trying to read facial expressions. Yes, thank you for that one. That's such a good one. So I'll want to get feedback from you all about the engagement today and your interest, knowing that, as much as I'm watching Carrie's face, she's probably multitasking with different things. I do have resources for you all. There's a list of inclusive strategies. There is the UDL guidelines site that gives you the information about the version 3.0. Self-determination theory is one of my favorite. That has great research around autonomy, that word that I used in there. And here's that book by Lisa Feldman Barrett that I have read over and over, and How Emotions Are Made. Sam Johnston and I wrote a piece that inspired some of what I shared today called Stretching UDL Beyond the Classroom, thinking about UDL for affordability, quality, and belonging in higher education. Kirsten, Tom's colleague, Kirsten Bellig, and I, she's from Tufts, have an article called UDL in American Colleges and Universities. And of course, as mentioned at the beginning, we had our special issue on UDL, personal and professional stories. Thank you so much, Diana and Robert, for the work on that. And then there's CAST. CAST is celebrating 40 this year. I, am happy to share anything about any of the 40th with anyone. But thank you all so much for being here this afternoon. I will hang on for any questions that may come up, but I do appreciate you thinking deeply about how we can design to recruit interest through our goals, methods, materials, assessments, and physical spaces. And I wish you well in optimizing all of those experiences.
So thank you so much, Allison. As always, inspiring. You're such a good friend to Goodwin, and we so appreciate you. I want to remind people that we have recorded this and we will be posting it. So if you have someone you'd like to share it with, Allison is always gracious. And Allison, with your permission, can I put your slides on the Padlet where we have?
100%. Yes. And then you all can access those links. Yes. Thank you so much.
So we'll be doing that as well. So I want to thank everybody for showing up, right? We know 90% of life is showing up, and here you are today, and what I'm sure is a very busy time of year for everyone. We appreciate your participation and look forward to seeing you in the next session. So thank you again.
Great to see you all. Thank you.